Hello and welcome to this video tutorial from CG Tuts. My name is Jonathan Williamson and today I'm going to be taking you through an introduction to character modeling in Blender. Some of the topics that we're going to be looking at are basic transform tools, extrusion, mirror modifiers, topology, setting up a custom workspace, and also modeling from a background image. And so rather than wait around any longer, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. First couple of things I want to look at is, since we're taking this as a beginner's tutorial, trying to take you through all the steps, let's first look at some of the most essential ones. We're going to assume that you already have the basics of navigation down. If you don't, there are many tutorials that you can reference on the web. But let's go ahead and look at some basic transform options. So in Blender, with objects that you're working with, you're able to move them around via the hotkeys or the widgets. By default, the widgets are enabled. I forgot to enable them here. But as you can see, we're presented with a series of widgets that allow us to modify the object as we wish based on the transform handles. And so you can see, currently I have the scale widget that I can just left click and drag on and scale the object as I wish. You can choose the move object or the translate, the scale, the scale or the rotate. Or if you hold down shift and left click on any of these, you can select multiples, and those will allow you to move, scale, or rotate your object as you wish from the transform widgets. Now, personally, I don't like to work with these. I find them to be visually obstructive and a much slower method, and so we're actually going to turn them off for this tutorial, and I'm going to urge that we work strictly with hotkeys. This is a much faster and much more intuitive method once you get the grasp on it. And luckily in Blender, these are very easy to remember. There's no need to worry about the position on the keyboard or anything like that, or trying to remember a series. Instead, it's simply S for scale, G for grab, and R for rotate. Now real quick, we're going to do that again, but let's go ahead and turn off the widgets here by just left clicking on the hand. And so now we don't have them at all. And so again, it's S for scale, R for rotate, and G for grab. Now, currently, this is working with just a single object, but since this is a modeling tutorial, we want to go ahead and look at it based on the individual vertices, edges, and faces. Now, to do this in Blender, all you need to do is go down to this menu here and go over to Edit Mode. The other option is to use Tab on your keyboard to tab in and out of Edit Mode or Object Mode. And so as you can see, when we enter Edit Mode, we see all of the vertices and edges and faces that make up our mesh. Now you'll notice if I right click on a vertice and right click on the adjacent one, I select the entire edge. If I select 4 adjacent vertices, I get the entire face. Now, one more thing to note, you also remember that the grab R or G, R, and S for grab, scale, and rotate apply to vertices as well as the whole objects, as do the transform widgets. But again, for this tutorial, we're going to leave these off to help you learn to use the hotkeys and to get up to speed with Blender quicker. If you don't find them intuitive and really do prefer the hotkeys, do prefer the widgets, feel free to use them. But for this tutorial and for the sake of learning, we're going to sidestep those. Now, there's one other thing that I would like to note before we look at some of the modeling tools, and that is if you need to switch between edge or vertex, edge, or face mode, such that you can select entire edges or faces with one click versus selecting all the vertices, simply go down to these buttons here and you can toggle between the three. Again, if you would like to use multiples, simply hold down shift to left click on them and you can use any combination you wish. For the most part during this tutorial, we'll simply be sticking in vertex mode. Now, one last thing to remember, again going into the hotkeys, is if you need to switch between modes quickly, simply hit Control Tab, and then you can select the mode that you wish. Okay, that's it for basic transform and also some selection and mode issues. Let's go ahead and look at some of the basic modeling tools and then also a mirror modifier so that we can go ahead and get started. Now first I'm just going to, let's go ahead to demo the Extrude, which is possibly arguably the single most important tool during the creative modeling process. Let's just demo this real quick by shift right clicking on each of these 4 vertices to select them, and then hitting E for Extrude, again, very easy to remember, And you'll notice that we get these three menu items here: region, only edges, and only vertices. 99% of the time, you'll use region, which extends the selected face, moves it along the normal, or the direction the face is pointing, and then allows you to position it as you wish. As soon as you left click, it locks it into place, at which point you can also move it, scale it, or rotate it any way that you wish. Now, going back to the menu there, you'll notice if we select only edges, it leaves behind the face and only pulls up the edges. Similarly, with only vertices, it takes up just the vertices. Very, very cool. This is one of the tools that we'll be using very, very often within our workflow. Now, I want to go ahead and go on to the mirror modifier. There are a good few more modeling tools that we'll be using during the process for creating our character, but we're not going to be using them for the time being. I'll introduce them as we go along so as to not just spill too much information on you at one time. Now, to demo the mirror modifier, I want to go ahead and select everything, hit X to delete, select vertices, and then hit spacebar to bring up my add menu and select cube. And the reason I did this is I want to go ahead and just get back to a default cube at the origin that's not been transformed or anything like that. Now, the mirror modifier is very cool. Let's just go ahead and check it out. Let's go over to the editing buttons here, and then under the modifiers panel, right about here, click add modifier. You'll notice we get this very long list, most of which we're going to ignore for now. Let's just look at the mirror modifier. So we'll left click on that, and you'll immediately notice, for one, our origin is not actually straight right now since we transformed the object earlier in edit mode, which is why you're seeing this at an odd angle. So let's go ahead and just fix that. And actually, we're just going to delete our object in edit mode. Remember, we can hit tab, and then just hit spacebar, add new from the front view, and so now we have another cube. Just needed to fix that real quick. So now we'll re-add our mirror modifier, and let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and deselect everything by hitting A on the keyboard. Select our face over here, and left click and drag and pull it over. You'll notice that everything is mirrored across the x-axis, or across the origin point, and mirrored over to the other side. This is very handy during the modeling process because it allows us to model a character from just a single side. And since most characters, and our character today, are roughly symmetrical, this makes our process much, much easier. And that's it. We're now ready to pretty much get started, but I want to move on to two more things real quick before we actually get started. And that is customizing our workspace a little more and setting up a background image so that we can model from. First, let's do the background image. And so what we're going to do is just go down to our view menu here and left click on background image. At which point we can just click load, and we're going to grab this reference.png that I've pulled in earlier. Now, this is just a very, very, very simple sketch of a character to give us some rough proportions or rough ideas of the proportions and such. Now, before we adjust this any further, we want to go ahead and set up our workspace. The reason that I don't want to adjust this yet is that when we split our workspace, it'll actually allow us to divide this view in two and then adjust each image as we go. You'll see more what I'm talking about in a second. So let's just go right up to the divider between our header and our viewport until we get this double-ended arrow. Then right-click and split area. This then gives us this vertical line that we can shift from left to right, or if we hit the middle mouse button, up and down, at which point we can left-click anywhere we want it to then split our view into two independent viewports. This is very, very handy because it allows us to model from two views at once. Okay, so now we can go ahead and adjust our viewport, our background images as we wish. Since our model is at the origin, we would like the center of our model, or of our reference, to be at the origin. And so simply adjust the X offset as needed on one image. And so we'll just move this over to, let's try 2.25. Oh, no, 2.45. There we are. That'll work perfectly. And then on this side, we need to move it over to negative X. And this one doesn't need to be exact, so we're right about there, about the center of gravity. And we'll just leave that as is. Occasionally, you may need to adjust the size or the Y offset of your images based on how well they're lined up. I've already checked this, and it's pretty well lined up, so we're not going to worry about it for the time being. So let's just go ahead and close these, and we are ready to start modeling. Okay, that's actually not completely true. We need to do one more step. And to do this, we need to go into edit mode, and adjust our cube here. Currently, we have a cube with a mirror modifier on it. However, half of our cube is on one side of the origin, half of it is on the other side. We need this cube to be split directly down the center so that we're working on only one side at a time. And so at this point, we're actually going to introduce a new tool called the loop cut tool. And this tool allows us to cut in a new line of vertices along a continuous loop or line of faces. And so let's just demo this real quick by hitting Control R. And you'll notice that a purple line appears along my faces. And so we want to cut it directly down the center here. So let's just hit Control R. And with the purple line right here, let's just left click. At which point you're allowed to slide this new line of vertices left and right as you wish along the green line. However, we want it directly in the center. So let's just click our middle mouse button, which will place it directly in the center. At which point we can select everything, reselect these 4 vertices, hit X, delete vertices. And now we have exactly 1/2 of a cube that's being mirrored across the x-axis for the other half. Now one last step I want to do, actually 2 last, is to enable do clipping, which allows me so that the center vertices lock to the axis and I can no longer move them away. And then also to enable the editing cage during edit mode. And this just allows us to see and select both sides. And we are now ready to start modeling. And so what we're going to do is go ahead and model from both views at once, to really nail down the proportions. And we're going to start by modeling the body here. And we're going to do it using some box modeling techniques. And so let's just go ahead and select everything. We're going to hit S to scale. And remember, you can select everything by hitting A. And we're going to scale down to about the width of the torso. We'll go ahead and hit G and move it up along the Z axis. And then from the side view here, you'll notice that I have this view in front view, which is 1 on your keypad, and this view over here in side view, which is 3. And now we can go ahead and just tweak these as we need. And we want to try and get the rough shape. So you'll notice that I'm hitting B to bring up my box selection tool, which then allows me to select these vertices. And then I'm moving them into place. I move them by hitting G to left click, or G to grab, move it down, left click to confirm, and then A to deselect. And so the nice thing with using the keyboard method is that you have a very intuitive workflow where you've got your left hand on your keyboard, your right hand on the mouse. Now this may be slightly reversed if you are left-handed or right-handed, depending on which you are and how you prefer to work. But generally keep one hand on the keyboard, one hand on the mouse. And all of the hotkeys are accessible via the one hand on the keyboard, and so you're able to work very, very quickly. And so what we're going to go ahead and do is with everything deselected, which if you have something selected, just hit A to deselect. We're going to hit B to bring up our box selection tool, and left click and drag over these vertices. Now you'll notice that I keep switching between wireframe mode and shaded mode. And you can do this by just hitting Z on your keyboard to toggle it. I have something enabled called backface occlusion, and this, or background geometry occlusion. And what it does is anytime there's a vertice that's hidden behind my mesh, it hides it. You'll notice that if I uncheck this button here, you can see the background geometry. You can also select it. However, once our mesh starts to get really dense, things are going to be a lot more confusing and hard to see. And so I like to go ahead and turn that on. What it means though is that in order to select vertices behind, I need to either rotate my view around or go into wireframe mode. But since my left hand's already on the keyboard, I can just go to wireframe mode very, very quickly and easily. So we want to go ahead and left click and drag with B for box select over these vertices, and then we're just going to hit E for extrusion, region, and take it up along the normals. And we're going to take it right up to about the armpit level. Right about there. Perfect. Now we're going to do this one more time by hitting E to extrude and take it up to the shoulder joint. So you'll notice what we're doing, is shaping the torso. And currently it's very, very simple. But it'll start to get more and more complex as we go. One thing that we're focusing on is something called topology. And the easiest way to think of topology is to think of it as the structure of your mesh, such as the foundation of your house and such. The way that we form our topology will be the form and structure of our entire model. And so it's very important that we get this right. And so what we're going to do is start doing an area at a time. So first we want to do the torso. And so let's go ahead and we're just going to continue shaping this. So you notice that I use my box select to select these, move it back to the front of the neck, take these ones back, and things like that. You'll notice also that currently the way that I have things positioned are at each of the major turning points. We're going to primarily be following muscles. And so you notice that these vertices here are right at the bottom of the rib cage. These ones here are along the hip line. These ones here are right underneath the arm and right above the arm and also the base of the neck. And so following some of the major points in the body can really help with our entire model. Okay, now we've gone as far as we can with our current mesh. And so what I want to do is go ahead and use the loop cut tool that we introduced earlier to add in a couple more loop cuts. And so what we're going to do is hit Control R, but before we left click or middle click, we're actually going to scroll up once on our scroll wheel, or just hit the plus sign on your keypad, and you'll notice that we now get 2 lines. You can scroll up as many times as you want for as many cuts as you want. But we just want 2, and so we're going to left click. Now what we want to do is go ahead and position these and smooth them out. And so what we're going to do is first just select this area here. So I'm selecting the entire side by hitting B and left click and dragging. And then we're going to hit S and Y to scale and then constrain to the Y axis. And so that's really just smoothing out the torso. And you can see then, I'll go ahead and select this one individual vertice, pull it up to the hip line, and do that with any of them that I need to. I'm going to go ahead and pull these 2 vertices right here back by shift right clicking on them, toggling into wireframe mode to see what I can see for the reference image, and I'm positioning these right around the shoulder and the area for the arm, because we're going to start out by extruding the arm out of just a single square here, and then we'll round it off later. Okay, so I want to continue shaping this. Remember, we really want to work on the shape as we go. For the more vertices we add, the more work it takes to get the shape right. And so we're just going to go ahead and keep selecting these areas by shift left clicking and positioning them as we see fit. However, I'm going to leave this area here, or excuse me, I'm going to move these out a little further. I'm going to leave this area mostly like it is, because we're actually going to take this entire area right in here and extrude it in and then up to start forming the neck. But we won't do that just yet. Let's get a little more smoothing done. And so one trick that we're going to use, rather than keep all this flat, is to go ahead and Alt right click on this edge here. And what that'll do is select the entire edge loop. Excuse me. And allow us to move it along. Now an edge loop is a continuous line of vertices, just like a face loop is a continuous loop of faces. And so now we're able to use a tool called Edge Slide and hit Control E, Edge Slide, and slide it down. And that'll just basically move it along the average of those faces, but it does the same thing and is also smoothing them out all the while. And so this is a very, very handy feature. And at this point, we can go ahead and leave the rest of it like it is. Although we'll maybe select these 2 vertices right in here and pull them in to start developing some of that back muscle. Okay, and we do of course want to be sure to save our file as we go. And now let's go ahead and extrude the arm from here. So we're going to select these 4 vertices, or that single face, and I'm going to hit E to extrude and region, and then immediately right click. The reason I right click is I don't want to extrude along the normal. I want to instead just hit G, take it right down to the wrist, go into wireframe mode so I can see my background image, rotate it to fit the direction of the wrist, scale down for the size, and maybe scale along the y-axis a little bit to widen it out, and we'll maybe position it right about there. Okay, and that's all I'm going to do for the wrist, because what this then allows me to do is very easily, rather than extruding this multiple times to try and get it, I can simply just add in an edge loop each time and each place that I want by hitting Control R. So in this case, we'll do the elbow right here. And then we can go ahead and pull this back to about where the elbow would be. We'll maybe scale it along the Z-axis by hitting S and Z. And maybe a little along the Y-axis by S and Y. There we are. And remember, we're not going to go into too much depth on the arm just yet because we're actually going to be adding another edge loop here in a bit to round it off. But for the time being, we'll go ahead and leave it just like this. Basically, we're getting the general form of our mesh down. Next, let's go ahead and work on the lower torso and the legs. We're going to save the head and the neck for just about last. And so for the bottom, let's go ahead and select this whole bottom area, and we're going to hit E to extrude region, and just take it down to about the bottom of the crotch. And then we're going to hit S and Z to scale down along the Z axis until it's flat. So just, relatively. And then we can start looking at this. For one, we want to select this area here, these ones, and we're going to pull it up like this to help form this the pelvis shape. But then we need to do another thing, and let's go ahead and take these two vertices here and pull them in, and then also pull this one up, because these are basically going to form the groin. And so we'll pull those ones up as well. And then we're basically just going to adjust each of these as we go to better form the shape of our character. And so you can see with these edge ones here, I can kind of form the muscle coming out from the hip. Start forming the buttocks. And just do each of these steps as we go. And so let's go ahead and select this entire area again. And we'll go ahead and, actually we're going to deselect this central area, because now we want to go ahead and start extruding the legs. And we don't want to extrude from the groin here. And so we'll just hit E to extrude, right click, and take it down to the knees. And then let's hit S, Z, and 0 on our keypad to scale it down to 0 for flat. And so now we just have a nice flat mesh, at which point we can maybe go ahead and select these ones here, scale them in a little bit, maybe take these two, pull them in towards the center, and then we'll go ahead and select everything, scale it down to about the size of the knees, and then extrude once down to the ankles, again scaling as we go, which you can remember is S on your keyboard. Okay, now obviously things are looking a little funky right now. Well, that's because we still have a long ways to go. Let's go ahead and extrude the neck area before we go any further, because then we'll be able to add in the final edge loop that we need to smooth off the leg, or to smooth off the arms and the legs. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and first save my file, and then I'm going to select this entire area right here. And what I'm going to do is hit E to extrude, right click, and scale in, and then pull it up to start forming up to the neck muscles here. Maybe scale up along the y-axis a little. Deselect these side ones by hitting B, right click and dragging to deselect, and then scale these up further. And then we can go ahead and select each of them again. We'll hit E to extrude, take it up to the neck, maybe scale down, and then we'll go ahead and hit E to extrude and take it up to the top of the head. Now you'll notice one thing that I did here is that due to the direction of the normals, I extruded towards the center, at which point these vertices here got locked into the center line. And so I need to hit E to extrude, right click, and then I can pull it up to the top of the head. At which point then I can also round some of these off. Now, we're not going to worry about the shape of the head just yet, as we've got a lot more work to do before we ever worry about that. And so we're going to leave our model right here as it is in terms of general form. And now what we want to do is go in and add the extra edge loops so that we can really start smoothing things out. Apologies for just a second as I take off my jacket as it's getting a little toasty in here. Okay, so what I want to do is go ahead and add an edge loop directly down the side here. And since I've kept my mesh relatively simple up to this point, I can just hit Control R and on the side, middle click. And that'll put one directly along the center all the way down. Now what I'm going to do, a trick to kind of smooth this out, is I'm going to hit Alt-S, and that'll scale along the normals. And so you can see each edge is scaling along its normal. And so we'll just hold down Shift to really smooth it out, or to keep it very gradual, and just smooth out just a little bit. We don't want to change our overall form too much, but we do want to help the smoothing process. There we are. Now we're ready to really start adding in edge loops and start adding in shape. And so let's go ahead and just work with the head first. And so what we're going to do is go back into edit mode, and let's first, from the front view, hit Control R, and let's just add in 3 edge loops. And what this will then allow us to do is go ahead and just grab areas of this and start pulling them out to get the general shape. Now, keep in mind, we're not going to be doing any facial features during this tutorial. There are many tutorials out there that already cover this, and since this is a beginner tutorial, we don't want to cover too much information in order to keep things simple and educational. There's simply too much information to learn. And so you'll notice what I'm doing is really just extruding or moving these areas around to get the general head shape. And this is, of course, very, very generalized. And so, maybe I'll put, here in a moment, I'll put in an indent for, perhaps the eyes and the nose, things like that. But we're not going to go much further than that. And so remember, all I'm doing is simply using Shift, right-click, A, and A for selecting, deselecting, and then hitting G, R, and S for scaling, rotating, etc., which I'm primarily just using G for grab. And all I'm doing is trying to kind of approximate the shape to a head a little more. And this is definitely an area where some anatomy knowledge is particularly helpful to know the general shape of the head without the hair or anything like that. But if you have a good reference on hand, stick pretty close to that if you're not comfortable with your anatomy. So like I said, we're just looking at the general shapes of our head here, which at this point we're pretty much done with the general aspects of it. And so you realize how simple that honestly was in terms of the overall process. I pretty much extruded the neck straight up and then simply added in a few more central edge loops. Very, very simple and very, very quick. But real quick, we have this simple head shape down, but honestly that's pretty boring. It would work for some things, but let's look at how to go ahead and add some simple shape to this to add in, some subtle features. So let's maybe look at adding in a basic shape for the nose and kind of a hint of the eyes. And so what we're going to do, as I'm tweaking the neck here, there we are, just getting that shape a little bit better. And so remember, I'm just using the same tools over and over again. Okay, so what we want to do is add in some loop cuts or edge cuts using a new tool, which will be the knife tool, in these areas to really help bring this out. And so the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is let's first work on the brows. And so we want to get this slight indent here. And so let's select this area here, and we're going to hit K and multi-cut. This brings up the whole loop cut menu, which you can see our loop cuts, Control R here, but also gives us three other options. The knife for exact, which will cut new vertices in exactly where you add them. Midpoints, we'll just put them in the center. And the multi-cut, which allows us to put in any number of cuts we wish. In this case, 2. And then you get a little knife icon, which we're just going to left click and draw across the center here and left click. And so now when we hit enter, you'll see that it immediately put in 3 more loops right in there. This is a very, very handy tool because it then allows us to do things like this to start adding in the shape and form of these basic characteristics. Now, we need to be careful because we now need to get rid of these triangles here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but one general rule of thumb to remember with good topology and good edge flow is to stay away from triangles. Now, there are cases where this is not a problem, but as a rule of thumb, particularly while learning, keep that in mind. And so what we need to do is go ahead and merge these triangles here into a single quad, that or to add more edge loops. Now, there's a couple different options here. Personally, this time around, I'm going to say that we go ahead and merge these into quads, or to go ahead and just move these around. Although, before we do that, let's go ahead and do a little more work with our model so that we can, keep seeing where this is going, because we may need to merge more as we go. So first, let's go ahead and select this area here And let's add a loop cut along here. And so we're going to hit K and midpoints, and left click and left click. Now we did the midpoints because we want it directly in the center, and since we're only doing one cut. This will then allow us to pull these out and get a little more form to our entire forehead area. As you can see, we now have a bit of a mess here that we're going to have to work with. But that's why we waited to merge these until later down the road, and we kind of saw what we were having to work with. Okay, now the last thing I want to do is go ahead and add in 2 cuts along this area. Well, not the last thing, but one of the last things. Add in 2 more cuts along this area by K, multi-cut, and 2. Just draw across there, and left click. What this will then allow us to do is get a little more of the nose shape defined. And so we'll move these up, and we want to try and keep things very, very clean. Now, one thing that you'll notice is currently, we're getting a bit of this mask look going on. We need to pull in another loop right here for the entire nose. And so let's go ahead and select this area here. Now, do keep in mind, some of these areas may be a little easier to model different methods. But one of the things that works well here, and by cutting these in by hand, is it also teaches you how to clean up the mesh. And that's one thing that really faces a lot of beginners is, you may be able to do all these cool things, you start to get a cool looking model, but then when you really look at the structure of it, it's an absolute disaster. And how do you clean that up? And so these are essential skills that you really need to learn. And so honestly, I'm being a little loose in how I model this in order to help show you those skills, because it is very, very important. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to select these 2 vertices, pull them back, and then we're going to pull these around as well, and I want to select this entire area right in here. And then we're going to hit E to extrude, right click, and then bring up our specials menu by hitting W and smooth. And smooth basically pulls these in and just smooths it out. What this then gives us is another set of vertices without extending along the entire model, more vertices to work with. And so you can see we can kind of get some of these other details in here that we wanted. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but what this also does is set up some of the edge loops that we would need if we were doing a full character. And so we're going to go ahead and smooth some of these areas out. There we are. Okay, now let's go ahead, before we go much further, let's go ahead and look at how to clean up some of these areas. And so first off, one thing that is bothering me on this is the jawline. So I would like to add a little more to this model. And so I'm going to use a tool called the Rip tool and select these 3 edges and just hit V. And you can see that it pretty much just ripped those apart. Now it can be a little finicky based on the direction of the faces, and sometimes it'll only do pieces or it won't work at all. And so we may need to do multiple rips. But you can see it just pretty much pulled those apart, which then allows me to go in and modify them further. And so let's maybe remerge these 2 vertices by shift right clicking on them, hit W, merge at center, and there we are. But we can then go ahead and select these 4 vertices and hit F to fill in a face. And this allows us to fill in empty areas. But what it's also allowing us to do is bring in another set of faces coming in along here that'll define the jawbone. What this also does is gives us another set of vertices to connect here. So one thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and go into face mode by hitting Control Tab and Faces, and we're just going to go ahead and delete all of these faces so that we don't have to worry about them. So we're just going to hit X, delete faces. We'll fill them in as we go. So now we're going to go back to vertice mode, like so, and we need to go ahead and delete these faces as well. And now what we want to go ahead and do is select these 3 vertices here, hit E to extrude, only edges in this case since we don't have any faces, and then immediately hit Y and pull them in along the Y-axis towards the front of the head. Because then we can connect these 4 vertices here and these 4 here. But what it also allows us to do is start connecting these areas. And so let's go ahead and we're going to follow some of our edge loops here and fill in this area here, and then fill in this area. And so you'll notice that I'm doing some of the main points first, before moving on to some of the other areas, because I need to see where I'm going to need to add more vertices and where I'm not. You can see that I can go ahead and fill these 4 here, because remember, we're not using any triangles, we're sticking to strictly quads. And then we're left, we can fill these 4, and we can fill those 4. And so you can see that it worked out just perfectly without having to add in any triangles. Now, do keep in mind that you can't just randomly connect 4 vertices at a time. You need to work with the actual edge flow, make sure everything is flowing well. But like I said earlier, we're not going to focus on that too much. There are good few tutorials out there that you can reference, particularly based around topology and human head modeling, that do cover all of these issues in depth to really give you an idea of how to structure your model such that it works very, very well, particularly when working in higher resolutions. But you'll notice at this point that we pretty much have a complete head model that gives an impression of what we're working with. And this will suffice for today without too much trouble. And so what we want to go ahead and do now is move on to the rest of the body, as we still have a good bit of work to do. Sorry, I'm doing just a slight amount of tweaking here. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the rest of the body. First thing, let's just make our way down. Let's work with the neck. First things first, let's hit Control R and add in another edge loop right in the center, which we can then scale down, pull in along the x-axis by hitting G and X, and make sure it's scaled right along the y-axis so that we can better define the neck. One of the biggest mistakes you can do is to completely ignore the neck. The neck is what really defines the connection between the head and the body, and what can really make or break a natural model, particularly from the chest up. You can see that alone, what we just did, helped immensely. So there we are. Okay, let's go ahead and keep making our way down and start working with the shoulders and chest. Now, we don't have to do too much work, as most of the topology is already in place. But let's just, start tweaking these. We can move these down to start forming the shoulder muscles. These down here. Apologies for Skype there. We'll maybe go ahead and select these, pull them down to about the sternum in here. And then we're actually going to add in another edge loop along the entire neck area right here by Control R and middle clicking. And then we'll just pull in these areas, pull these in, take these out. So you'll notice that I switch between wireframe and shaded mode quite often. This particularly helps visualize your model, but it also helps with selection and whatnot. I'm going to pull the jawbone down a little, give a little more form to my model. If things aren't working out with your reference, don't be afraid to stray away from it, particularly when you're not required to follow it to the T. So that pretty much does it for the neck area. Let's go ahead and keep moving our way down the chest. Maybe pull these up a little. Let's go ahead and, before we do much with the chest or the arms, let's actually go and look at the stomach, because this alone will help us a lot. And what I want to do is go ahead and shape the rib cage with this loop right here. And so first on the front, let's select these two, pull them up to about the front of the rib cage there. These ones on the side, pull them down. Take all of these in to fit the rib cage. And then along the back, we'll maybe pull these up a little bit. Okay, and now we can just add in another edge loop by Control R and middle click. And then we'll just scale that up a little bit. Pull it down. And then this then allows us to take these down, Maybe take these up a little bit. Take these up, and you can see it starts to form the pectoral muscles. Which you also notice, maybe we want to start moving in some of these areas here to smooth those areas out. And I'm going to kind of move around the entire model while doing things like this, just to be sure to combat all the areas at once. Okay, there we are. So we'll go and hit Control W, save it. Now let's go ahead and move on to the stomach area. The stomach, I'm just going to go ahead and add in another edge loop here. Control R, middle click. And this involves also working with the hips as well, so we can pull those areas in. We'll pull these in. Remember, it's B for box select. Left click and drag. Pull the stomach out a little. Particularly feel free to stray away from your reference if it's not accurately portraying what you want. Be that for anatomical or artistic reasons, whatever it may be. Okay, so that's doing pretty well just like it is. And we're not going to do a whole lot more with it. Maybe we'll pull those in a little to help define the back muscles. Pull these down a little bit. Okay, obviously we don't have a huge amount of polys to work with in terms of accurate anatomy. And remember that we don't have a realistically proportioned character anyway. It's a little stylized, and so this isn't a big issue. Okay, now let's go ahead and move on to the arms. So, notice that we're just kind of grasping or taking on one area at a time. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add in 2 edge loops for the biceps, which then we can go ahead, or for I guess I should say the upper arms, which then we'll just, move these into place, like so. Now, one thing that I'll notice is that we really currently don't have enough polys in the shoulder. One, to get the shape, but also we want to plan to have this model animated. And so what we need to do, in order to allow our model to be animated well, is move some of these polys around and give us, in general, you want 3 loops to deform around. This basically allows you to leave 1 in place, 1 at the base of the new location, and then the 3rd one to smooth it out. And so general rule of thumb is keep 3 loops at any joint that you're going to be moving around. Particularly on just in general. And so we want to go ahead and add in that new loop. And so you can see I've just done that there. Perfect. Move these back a little bit. Excuse me. And so we can continue go ahead and working with the arm. We'll go ahead and pull these areas in. Give a little more definition to the bicep. Scale these areas up for the tricep region. Take them back. Take these areas back for the back of the shoulder. And do keep in mind, obviously, our mesh is very, very simple, and so we're looking at more of the entire shape of a object or a portion of the model versus the actual detail. Maybe this is a little too defined. There we are. So now let's go ahead and do the forearm. So we'll add in 2 loops here. And we can take these up. Take these up. Move these around as we need. So we're just getting the shape down. Maybe add in another loop here. First one around the elbow, which will scale up. So remember, we want 3 joints. We'll take these ones in, and we'll add in another loop here. We'll go ahead and select this one and hit Control E and slide it up. scale up a little bit. That allows us to better define this area here as well. Scale these areas up. Kind of getting the general muscle flow down. Take this area in to define the elbow just a little bit. There we are. We'll work with these areas a little bit to help better define the forearm. And there we are. That's looking pretty good. So we'll go ahead and save this. And before we do the hands and the feet, let's go ahead and do the legs. And so for the legs, we'll add in, say, two loops here, Control R. Let's go ahead and Alt right click on first one loop and hit S and scale along the Z axis, and then we'll scale it up. Select the other one, scale it up just a little bit. Then on the right side, scale up along the Y axis. Let's maybe select this entire loop here, and then hit B and right click and drag down to about the hip. So then we can hit Control E and edge slide to move it over and take it out along the X axis and the Y a little bit to smooth that area out. Let's go ahead and look at the buttocks region. So we'll pull these in, take these down, take these up. Let's go ahead and add in another edge loop right there. Actually, let's go ahead and add an edge loop right along here, along the hip, which will allow us to better define this area. And so we're just working with the general shape here. We'll pull this down, and then we can pull these in. And on this portion, I'm going to kind of ignore my reference a little bit because it's definitely off. Pull these areas out. So some areas, I'm definitely working fairly close to the reference, but more importantly than the reference itself is I'm working to make the model feel natural, which honestly my fairly poor sketch does not display very well. Okay, there we are. And so you can see as I'm tweaking each of these areas to hopefully make it look and feel a little more natural. Maybe take these areas in a little bit. Take these down slightly more. And there we are. Save that, and let's continue on with the rest of the leg. And so we want to go ahead and add in a loop right here and a loop right here, which will allow us to give us enough joints or enough loops to add in the joints for the knees. And so as you can see, I'm working with these one by one. And you'll notice that I've started doing just a little more modeling versus explaining exactly what I'm doing. And this is because I am doing the same thing pretty much over and over again. It's all the same tools. Left click to select, shift left click to select multiples, G, R, and S, move it around, occasional extrude, Control R for loop cut. And so it's mostly the same thing over and over again. And that's really the way that the modeling process works. It's really a couple of set tools that then you use a lot. And so as you master those tools, things will become very, very quick. And that's one of the reasons that it's very quick, is it is, one thing repeated a lot. And so if you continue to work with each of those tools, they will become more and more natural the more you work with them. And as, naturality comes, so does speed. And so you can see I'm working with each of the areas here, getting in just enough polyflow to define my general shapes. Here we are. Okay. And that pretty much does it for the legs. And so now we're going to move on to the scary part, and that is the hands and the feet. And so let's go ahead and we'll go first save our model. And we're going to start with the hands. And the hands are one of those things that are, some might say they're deceptively simple, others would say they're darn right complex and obnoxious. But when it really comes down to it, you know, it is a challenging thing to model, but once you get used to it, it's fairly simple. And so we're going to try and take this as simple as possible. And so we're first just going to select the entire wrist, hit E to extrude, and just take it out to about where the knuckles would be. So right about there. And then we're going to go ahead and do one finger at a time. So first let's hit S and Y and scale it up to about the width that the hand would be. And then we're going to do a little bit of adjustment to move these around to kind of get the oval that your hand, or I guess you could say the curve of the hand right here. For the time being, we are completely ignoring the thumb. And we'll get to that as we get to it. We'll just rotate this around slightly. And now we're going to work with these one finger at a time. Now, I say that, but really what I mean is we're going to make one finger and then duplicate it 4 times and scale it as needed and then reattach. And so first, let's go ahead and get this ready. What I need are 4 individual faces right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And so, excuse me, I just ate dinner just a little bit ago, and so still on a full stomach. If we add in an edge loop right here and an edge loop right here, we'll get exactly what we need. Now, we can't just simply select this and hit cut, cut, and expect it to work. Simply because we don't want to have to clean up our mesh a lot as we go. And so instead, what we're going to do is go and hit Control R, add in an edge loop right here, and then we're going to select this entire region. Move over to a side view right here so we can see this area like this, and then we're going to hit K to bring up our knife cut and select midpoints. And then we're just going to left click here, 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 and here, and then hit enter. Now, you'll notice we have 4 faces right here, ready for fingers and ready to go. But let me show you the really cool part to what we just did. After I adjust these faces real quick, all I'm doing is making them a little more square to attach fingers to, is with some slight smoothing, say scaling these 2 vertices up, like so, and doing that on the other side, I have kept our entire quad workflow just like that. So I've basically multiplied these cuts while keeping the quads to bring it down to 4 faces without ever adding in a single triangle. And so I'm keeping our mesh very, very clean. But what it also does is then gives us this form right here, which we can help work on the curve of the hand, or here to work in the palm and things like that. And so it's really a win-win situation all around. So that aside, let's go ahead and start working on the fingers. So what I'm going to do is first select this face, and let's make sure it's fairly square. And we're just going to select the entire face, and we're going to extrude it, and we're going to follow this, this angle here. So then we'll rotate it, pull it down to the tip of the finger, scale it down, about like so. And then let's first add in a cut right here, move it up to a joint, a cut here, move it up to a joint, and we basically have a finger. Now we're going to do just a little bit more, in that we're going to shape this, get a little more of a tip, and then we're going to add in our 3 loops, or technically 2 loops in this case, for each of the joints to, make this work well. What this also allows us to do is also define a little more shape to our finger. For example, we can take this top face here, pull it up, do the same here, and that'll kind of display our knuckle right there. And so we can, do this continuously. We'll smooth some areas out, pull these areas in, which can form the creases in the finger. Now we need to do the same thing up here. And in this case, we're actually only going to use 1 loop, because then we're actually going to add in another loop all the way along here. Even though we may not need it, we'll add it just in case. And then we can go ahead and pull these areas in. Pull these out. We'll do these ones while we're at it. And there we have a finger. And so we're going to go ahead and first off get rid of this funky rotation. There we are. That'll be enough. And then we're going to go ahead and select our entire finger, just like so. Actually, first we need to do one thing, and that's go into face mode by hitting Control-Tab. Select these 3 faces, hit X, delete faces. Go back into vertice mode. Select our finger, along with this one, and select these 4 vertices. Hit Shift-D to duplicate it. Move it over. For the middle finger, we'll scale it up a little bit. Rotate along the Z just a little slightly. Pull it out along the X-axis. So remember, anytime you do any kind of transformation, whether it's scale, rotate, or grab, you can lock it to any one of the individual axes by just hitting the corresponding key on your keyboard. And so we're going to do this 3 times. Adjusting each one to, mostly fit the hand. Scaling them down to, approximate size. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and we'll select these 3 vertices, hit W, merge at center. Select these 2, W, merge. Select these 2. And we don't really care if some of these are overlapping. It doesn't really cause a problem. You may want to move it such that they're not overlapping just for cleanliness sake, but it doesn't really matter in this case. Now one thing I am going to do is go ahead and select our entire hand and hit Shift H, which will hide the rest of the model, just so that we don't have to worry about it while we're working. And so some of these areas you may need to tweak to get them to fit better. But then we can go ahead and, once again, select them, merge at center. We'll do this for each of these, and then tweak any that we need to. And that pretty much gives us that portion of the hand. Maybe pull that out a little bit for the fleshy part. Pull these down. And now we need to model the thumb. Okay, well, the thumb is actually fairly simple, and what we're going to do is go ahead and use the last 2 joints of our finger as a base. And so I'm just going to select these areas, which you notice I'm using Alt-Shift, right-click. I'm going to hit Shift-D, hit Alt-S to scale along the normal, since the thumb is thicker in proportion as well as size. And then we're just going to use our Rotate to move these around. And remember that the thumb sits at pretty much a 45-degree angle to the rest of the hand. And so we'll position it approximately where it would go, like so. We'll also lengthen each of the individual portions. And then we need to go ahead and connect it here. And so let's just go ahead and select this face, hit X, delete faces, And then we'll Alt right click on and Alt Shift right click on these two and hit F, Skin Faces and Edge Loops. And that will merge those two loops, but we also need to hit Control N to recalculate the normals, which flips the direction the faces are pointing, and also hit W and Set Solid, just for consistency's sake. Now, obviously, you can see that we need to do some things to make this work better. One, let's go ahead and add in 2 edge loops. This will then allow us to define these joints here, and to also go ahead and work with this area. Now, this area here, we need to do some remodeling, because we don't, this isn't going to work to just have this extruding awkwardly from this area. Once again, I'm going to select my entire hand and hit Shift H to hide everything else. And so we need to go ahead and figure out a better way to connect this. Well, actually, this may just work. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt H to unhide and hit Shift right click on this loop and that vertice, and then Control Z and then hit hide, because I want to go ahead and see this edge here, because I want to go ahead and rework this. And so what I'm going to do is go in with this vertex selected. Let's try just hitting V, and it's not going to rip very well, so let's go and go into face mode. We'll select these faces here and hit X and delete faces, and then Control Tab in vertex mode. What I want to do is better connect this area here. And so first, let's just take this vertex, extrude it straight up, fill in these faces, and then connect this here. And then that actually does everything that we need to do by allowing us to fill that. And basically what I've done is just moved this portion over one, which then gives me a much better connecting joint to the thumb. It also allows me to kind of define this fleshy portion of the thumb much easier. So, I can do some modeling here to move these areas over and better define that. Now, keep in mind that we are just working on the general shape here, and we're not looking at any of the real detail. And so at this point, it's just a matter of modifying the vertices that you have to better kind of approximate the shape that you have and to give the impression of your shape. And in this case, currently our thumb is rather awkward. And so one of the things we can do is pull these areas up, add a bit more thickness here. And what actually we want to do is, I realize that we have this slightly wrong. We need to actually rotate this 90 degrees with our mesh. And so what we're going to do is hit Y and split, rotate around so we're about at the right angle, and then just rotate this 90 degrees, rotate it again, and then we're going to select these two loops, hit F, Skin Faces and Edge Loops, and then we can just Alt right click on one of them, hit X, and delete face loop, and then Control N, W, and Set Solid. There we go. That was the entire issue with our thumb. That was throwing me off. We had an impossible joint, essentially. So just working a little more to better define this shape. And there we are. That's pretty much the hand. We're going to leave that as is for the time being, at least. Obviously, we don't want to go too much longer on this tutorial, as we're already getting pretty long. But what we're going to do is go ahead and model a general shape for the feet. Now, in this case, we're not going to model the toes, simply because I kind of want to show you both methods. A lot of times with simple models, you will see the hands and or the feet designated by just simple shapes, kind of almost blocks. And this works for a lot of cases. Sometimes you need the full joint, though, in which case like we did on the hand. But in the case of just a blocky form, this is what we're going to do. This is particularly good for kind of demonstrating an idea. If you need to pitch an idea to a client, don't have a lot of time, then don't worry about things like fingers or toes. Just try and get the entire general shape down. So what we're going to do is select this whole bottom area of the foot, the leg, hit E to extrude, take it down to the heel. Then we're going to select these front two faces, excuse me. And actually, yes. And then we're just going to hit E to extrude, take it out to about the length of the foot, and then start modifying. So first we'll take it down just the height. Let's select this entire bottom, hit S, Z, and 0 to make it flat. We'll move these three back for the heel. These three. We'll move these ones forward. Let's go ahead and add in three edge loops along here, which will then allow us to define the shape of the overall foot. Like so. Along with the bottom of the foot. Find the heel, pull these two up a little bit, these two up a fair bit, and then from the top view, we're going to select these sides, pull them out along the x-axis a little bit, pull these out, pull these in, take these in along the x-axis, and really we're just nailing down a simple foot shape here. I'll rotate this along the z-axis a little. Make his feet pointing out. I'm going to go ahead and add in another edge loop along the entire center. This way I can get a little more definition on things like the heels, the toes, etc. Also allows me to pull these in and get that kind of the side slope to the foot. We need to adjust this a little further to get the entire shape. And that is pretty much it. That gives us a basic foot shape, which is more than enough for most projects, particularly if the character happens to be wearing shoes or anything of the sort, then you don't even need to worry about the toes. And so, something like this will work in a lot of scenarios. I've used it a good few times in my own work. And you've got to remember that it's quite the time saver. And literally, particularly as a freelancer, the expression goes that time is money is very, very true. As a freelancer, a lot of times you'll find yourself working on a per project basis. Now, this is not in effort to screw over a client, but as the market goes, when you're working on a per project basis in terms of funding, the faster you can get something done, obviously sticking within the targeted quality and whatnot, the more money you essentially make. And so this is very, very appealing because you're not shotting them of anything. You're simply giving them more for what they buy, basically. And so, the faster you can work while maintaining the quality, the better. And that's one advantage to Blender, is that it really does allow you to work very, very quickly based on the hotkeys set and a lot of the interface paradigms that, even though a lot of people find very, very odd, really do allow you to go above and beyond and work very, very quickly. And so that is that. That is an introduction to character modeling in Blender, hopefully covering pretty much all the bases to get you started. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. I know I certainly have. And again, this is Jonathan Williamson from CG Toots, and I will see you next time.